alaikum and welcome to Perspective. We begin tonight with Pakistan's federal budget for year 2026-27 and the latest economic survey, which together presents a broadly encouraging picture of gradual economic stabilization and reform momentum. Key indicators point to improving fiscal discipline, strengthening foreign exchange reserves, rising remittances and growing activity in the digital and services sectors, while important challenges remain, particularly around human development and inequality. Policymakers are emphasizing that the direction of travel is towards greater stability, modernization and long-term economic resilience. To help us unpack these developments and what they could mean for growth, investment and everyday Pakistanis, we are joined by two leading experts. Dr. Usman Chohan, advisor on economic affairs and national development at Center of Aerospace and Securities, CAS. And a little later on, we will also have with us Dr. Nasir Iqbal, who's an economist with PIDE. Thank you for being with us. Dr. Usman, we've spoken from time to time about the direction that our economy is taking, about what we expect from it, about where this is leading us. As far as this particular budget is concerned, how are you looking at it, and in terms of the priorities, and like I earlier said, in terms of moving towards stabilization, what are your thoughts?
Yes, first of all, it's such a pleasure to converse with you every time. And today, the subject is being the budget is so crucial for us because, as you correctly mentioned in the preamble, the direction is positive. The direction of travel is the right one. And that is because, as we discussed in the budget speech, our finance minister eloquently put it, there are challenges, there are many challenges. But a lot of it has to do with exogenous problems, the Middle East being the big one, the risk of inflation, the risk of conflict. And it goes to the credit of the government that we took proactive measures of varying types as soon as conflict broke out in late February. For example, the idea that we would have austerity in terms of petroleum usage, work from home, all of those measures were a very good decision. And of course, the mediating role, which we've covered extensively on your program, has been a very positive thing. I mean, I wish other countries had stepped up the way Pakistan did in the wake of the desire for world peace. So that is an important part of it. Now, if you look more operationally and tactically at the budget, there are some measures to give some relief to the salaried class, open up the real estate sector by reducing transaction fees, trying to strengthen the housing and other expenditures. So there is an idea that some wiggle room has to be found, even within resource constraints. And the IMF was positively inclined on all of these. And the IMF has given a laudatory assessment of how Pakistan has navigated this program in such a difficult time over 2 years that this extended fund facility has lasted. So these are the good things. As far as the challenges go, it is recognized that the structure of the budget, the way that it is spent, the relationship between the center and provinces, how much is going into interest payments, questions about pension and all that, these still loom large, and they are addressed to some degree, but it is a conversation that has to be had over the course of this fiscal year.
In terms of moving forward, and like you said, of course, challenges remain clearly the Middle East and overall a largely unstable world when we look at it. In terms of bringing this down to, of course, the grassroots level, are we at least moving towards that in your opinion?
I would certainly say so. I would say that we've gone through a difficult decade since COVID, since 2020. And in that time, a lot of sacrifice, since you're speaking of the ground level, referring, of course, to the common man and his plight. It has been a lot of struggle. There is a concept of the new poor in the developing world, that people who had a better time in the previous decade have struggled more. Those realities still persist. But despite that, you can see that this effort to stabilize will have to continue. It will have to continue through the next fiscal year. But the common man's plight is likely to be alleviated by the time this resolves. If you agree with me that some sort of resolution will occur between US and Iran in terms of global interest rates, inflation, and all these things ensuing from that, if you believe that things are going to get better at that macroeconomic front, then things will be better at our level, national level, common man level, ground level as well.
First of all, when we talk about informal economy, it is being said that this budget is focused, largely on that. Is it, in your opinion, in terms of the risks and opportunities with that, what are your thoughts?
Yes, our finance minister had said about a year ago, on multiple occasions, in fact, that the informal economy in Pakistan, if you add that to the formal economy, we are already $1 trillion economy. Simply because the size of informality is so large, it in fact dwarfs the formal economy by a ratio of more than, or basically 2 to 1. So if that is true, and we simply cannot know because by definition, informal economy means it is unmeasurable. You would never know the extent. You can only make approximations. Then trying to formalize it should be a priority. That I do see in this budget in several ways. One is on the emphasis that was made on digitization and continuing digitizing processes to disintermediate things. That always helps with formalization. But the second is certainly in the economic survey yesterday, even more so than today, the idea that the sectors of the economy that have the largest footprint and still don't pay their uh, due share of, for example, revenues, such as the merchants, retailers, and so on, they have to be formalized accordingly, and measures have to be taken in that regard. Some measures seem very simplistic, but the idea would be to drag them into the net and then expand on complexity thereafter. That is a very significant part of the quote informal economy in terms of the flow of cash in it, the circulation of money in it. So when you start to tackle things like that, it's good. There are questions also about the agriculture sector, which I feel are not as fully addressed in the budget, because that is another big sector where it happens. And what I would like to see, and I'm sure you would agree, is that there has to be better balance amongst the economic sectors with as much relief or accommodation given to manufacturing and industrial sector over these others which are less productive. And it's a lesson we learned from the West also, where they have prioritized reshoring and manufacturing, but it's too late for them, but it isn't too late for us.
When we look at stabilization, when we look at macroeconomic gains, so to speak, we also have to acknowledge, as far as poverty is concerned, that has risen. How does that, what about this disconnect that we see with fiscal improvement and what can be said as social hardship, in your opinion?
Yes, I like this terminology. I don't like the concept of social hardship, of course, but I appreciate this terminology because this hardship, as we are just discussing, the new poor of this decade is a reflection of that hardship, and our public has borne the brunt of a wave of exogenous crises over the last 5 years. Now, in that regard, the government has signaled that it wants to ease up some of the measures that have added to the plight of ordinary people or added to their hardship, whether it is through taxation on the salaried class, whether it is through indirect taxation or through the petroleum levy, because we're a petrol dependent economy. All of those things the government recognizes the hardship manner. But then again, there's one other thing about GDP as it's being calculated, that it's done per capita. And our population growth, which is a subject you and I have conversed at length about, continues to be very high. Therefore, if we don't look at both sides of the GDP per capita, numerator and denominator, we may risk being a permanently poor country because our population continues to grow and the resource base isn't growing as fast or fast enough to accommodate it, whether it's in employment, whether it is in terms of consumption, whether it's in terms of domestic investment. You simply can't accommodate that many people entering. So the per capita element is one that the government isn't responsible for, people are, and it's something to think about.
We talk about, of course, technology inroads. We talk about AI, and you've also spoken about it. In terms of that, sort of really expanding Pakistan's tax net in the short term, what are your thoughts on this?
Yes, there are measures being considered to use AI further. It is already being deployed, but use it further in order to determine the appropriate amount of tax burden. But once you know that, once you have that data, it doesn't automatically translate into enforcement. That still requires political will. So that's the first thing. You might know how much is owed, but you might still not extract it. The second thing is that taxation is only half of the equation. Expenditure is the other. And in terms of expenditure, if we continue to try to squeeze enterprises or individuals, there is only so much out there to squeeze within the sectors we have chosen to squeeze. So again, we need better balance amongst the sectors. AI can help with that, but even old school methods would be able to pull that off. It's more so a question of political will in terms of getting it. And then the second part is, do we really even want to squeeze it that hard rather than look at reconciling the balance? And the balance is not just a federal subject. Since 98% of our population lives in some province, it's a more of a provincial subject. And you can use AI at that level, but then AI has to be used in all dimensions where it's useful, such as property values, such as tolls, such as traffic movement. There's so many elements where AI helps in terms of the
And
budget and in
Dr.
terms of
Usman, the
the
question of how equipped we are to be able to do that also arises, right?
but we have the technological capability as well as the human resource to pull that off because it's not just a public sector question. We can easily draw upon the private sector as well as overseas institutions, overseas Pakistani institutions, and other such things are also available to us. There's actually a very large toolkit available to us if that's what we're aiming for.
Right, fair enough. Let me Usman in this. Dr. Usman, do you agree with what Dr. Nasir is saying? You know, in terms of my question about, of course, you know, how it relates to the common man, of course, is also pertaining to inflation. It is pertaining to the fact that, of course, you know, every elected government has a huge burden to carry in that regard. And of course, they want to make things better for their electorate. In terms of that kind of move and in the kind of climate that we're in, that you know you earlier spoke about as far as the unstable region is concerned overall, what are your thoughts?
Yes, fundamentally, it is correct that not everything that is in the budget automatically signifies a benefit or a loss to the common man. But the common man is only one dimension, albeit the most crucial one, of the budgeting exercise, which is just an accounting exercise at the end of the day. What do those figures really mean? How do we even translate that to ordinary life? That is not, that's quite an esoteric exercise. And the other thing is that people don't quite understand the visualization of the budget. As Dr. Nasser mentioned, interest payments are a significant amount of expenditures. Transfers directly to the provinces are a significant amount of expenditures. And yet the debate often happens about running the civil government, expenditures to the military, or PSDP, pensions. These topics are actually very small line items within our budget. And even in terms of taxation, direct taxation is smaller than indirect taxation plus non-tax revenues, so the levies and all that. So because we don't see this image often enough unless we read some papers. I have multiple papers on it. Unless you see it laid out, you'd be like, I think we're talking about the wrong things in general. That may be because there may be vested interest groups who are louder. That may be because people want to deflect attention from what really matters. That may be because the elements that should be addressed are too sensitive or they're too dull. So, in fact, the conversation I would like over time should gravitate towards questions in public discourse, towards things that actually are the largest in terms of magnitude and impact on the budget, both from the revenue side as well as expenditure.
So do you think that we will move towards that conversation? You know, and perhaps if not during this budget, then the next one?
I doubt it, although it's very nice to have the substantive conversations that are always on your show. I don't think that that would be in the interest of, vested interest to do that. I also don't think that it would appeal automatically to a general public because it's out of their hands. I mean, now what is an ordinary citizen going to do about interest payments to the domestic banking system from the federal government? It's a totally removed and obscure thing. Similarly, the things that affect them more might be pensions. Bureaucrats are louder than
The fuel
ordinary.
prices, or for example, the fuel prices, or for example, the kind of taxation on mobile phones. So, I mean, those are things that would seem to matter to ordinary citizens, right?
Very true. And petroleum is a very good example where it actually does matter. But for example, mobile phones or other ticket items don't immediately, in this larger scope of things, matter that much. So even if you do squeeze 10, 20% more from certain laptops or whatever, it doesn't actually impact the thing. But I agree with you on the petroleum thing, but that is an exceptional case, of course, because the US-Iran war, if you go back to January, you wouldn't have seen it coming. We simply wouldn't have seen this coming. So yes, I agree with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Usman Chohan. Always a pleasure having you. Thank you for joining us.